Right, Lavita, you wanted to have a chat. So Lavita just completed a retreat. How many days was it?
10 days, 10 nights, 11 days.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
monastery retreat. So how was the
Yeah.
experience like for you?
It was nice. I think I only managed to make it 10 days because I expected it to be a lot more stricter, but it wasn't so strict. So I think that's how it was okay. But I did meet people there who were struggling a bit. I think I didn't know what to expect. So it was good. I had your voice and Elwin's voice like in my head quite a bit when I was practicing. I'm still learning from the practice that has happened, but I do have questions about mixing, or rather, like, because like what they taught there is different from what you taught. And I went there with like a complete beginner's mind, but I didn't know how to approach certain things.
Mm.
So it's just like what I can do for my following retreats. But yeah, I think the biggest takeaway I learned is that your mind is not just in your head, which I always assumed. Your mind is like in your body. So that was interesting.
So the differences you noticed was, I believe, will be more of the styles of meditation, right?
Yeah.
What was the style over there?
They tell me not to think, whereas yours is like observe the thoughts. But also like you can't stop the mind from thinking, right? I mean, it's like always there. But also like not everything is true, if that makes sense. Yeah, so it's like, if is being taught like not to think, should I be practicing that more? Or like is observing the thought something more for like people who are a bit more advanced?
Right. So when they taught you not to think, what's the focus point? Was it the breath?
No, it was acknowledgement. So it was like whenever something come up, you go like, okay, feeling, 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 thinking, thinking, thinking,
Mm.
or smelling, 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 hearing, 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 something like that. You just like say it 3 times. But the idea of it, at some point he told me not to think. So I was like, but how do you not think? Um,
At some point, you meant a few days into the retreat, correct? They started to tell you not to think. So at first you were observing, and after that, don't think about it.
yes, few days in, yeah. I
Yeah,
wasn't
and
really observing though. I was just like trying to acknowledge everything because I'm not very still, right? So I'm always like hearing something or I'm seeing something or I'm thinking of something. So I'm never like still. Yeah.
while after they told you not to think, not to observe, you naturally was able to observe, correct? To
I
observe
acknowledge.
when your mind is drifting, when any habitual patterns were coming up, like trying to move, trying to think, trying to speculate, trying to
Mm.
imagine. You were able to capture those thoughts.
Yeah, whenever I caught myself, then I like named it. Then I go back to practicing either the walking meditation or the sitting meditation. So the sitting
Mm.
is on your breath and the walking is like walking. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the difference.
Yeah.
Okay. So actually what they were shifting you, so at first it was noting 3 times. You just note like thinking, 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 and then you let it go. But if it comes back up, the same kind of thinking, then you're thinking, 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 correct?
Mm.
And certain thoughts leads to certain emotions, then you have to note the mental states. Am I right? For example, irritation, 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 distraction, distraction, anxiety, 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 frustration, frustration. Just to see the pattern of the relationship between the mind and mental states. So in Buddhism, we don't actually use the word emotions that much. We use, when emotion is very simple, there's only pleasant, neutral, unpleasant, and we identify them as Vedana, which is feelings. You have a good feeling, a bad feeling, and a neutral feeling. So the other things are seen as Dharma or mental phenomena, which are mental states. So joy is a mental state, loving kindness is a mental state, anxiety is a mental state, distraction is a mental state. So I believe they did not tell you to identify it as I'm anxious, right? It's just anxiety, anxiety,
Yeah.
anxiety. It's noting anxiety as it is. So that is what they wanted you to do in that technique, the style. It's a Vipassana style to note everything that is arising in the mind. So you have a very clear comprehension of what's happening. And when they told you not to think, it is actually shifting into bare awareness. Because for the first 3 days, you were learning to identify the thoughts and the mental states. which means that there's the observer here and what is being observed, correct? And in between, it can be attachment or detachment. Of course, when we have attachment, we get carried away by the thoughts and the mental states. Am I right? Following so far? But while you're dwelling here, there is detachment. There is a clear awareness, just knowing. But then there is one thing called the bare awareness. And the bare awareness, they ask you to go into bare awareness because you have been building on that awareness, that mindfulness of 3 days. So it's just dwelling in that bare awareness. Because you have built the bridge back into yourself. And you're just here. And that's bare awareness. Meaning that it doesn't matter whether states arise. Because it's second nature for you to really acknowledge or to call out the different mental states or the sensory input. By just being very bare, it means dwelling here. So it is still Vipassana. So that technique is actually, usually people start from Samatha. Samatha means focusing on a breath, a mantra, a visualization. And then they shift to Vipassana. Vipassana means looking deeply or developing insight. But for what you went through, you start from Vipassana and then you go to Samatha. That style is important. It's because you start building on mindfulness first. Because without mindfulness, samadhi cannot be achieved. So simply put, when you're trying to steal the mind, and then we get caught up in the thought, that is because we have lost our mindfulness. Simple as that. So for your case, the style they were teaching you was to build on the mindfulness first. And then you go into bare awareness because you know there's a place to dwell in, to sit in. And that is the shamatha part. And the meditation object was very simple. It's just focus on that awareness or focus on the sense of being. They're not asking you to watch the breath, right? I believe. Right? It's just, yeah. So in a way, don't think, it means don't do anything also. Just be. So naturally, you identify certain things popping up, and that's very normal. But you just will know that it doesn't matter whether you can catch the thoughts or not. It doesn't matter. If it is noting, it's noting. Because if it's noting and then you go thinking, oh, why am I noting it? See, that's thinking again. That's why they say don't think. I say, oh, I thought about it. Okay. So if you go and think and then you notice that you're thinking and then maybe it's causing you a bit of anxiety because perhaps you're not doing it well, then you see you're back to day 1 and 2. Oh, there's an anxiety again. So that is the process until you can really, really become very still. So that is what it meant. Okay?
Yeah, correct. Okay. So are you allowed, because I completely went in with that beginner's mind, like I never practiced the metta, nothing. Because I didn't know, like, okay, what can be mixed, what cannot be mixed, I wasn't so sure. So it's a mix of like, it was a bit stupid. I think I was being a bit stupid as well, because not knowing what to do until like my second last day or something. That's why I went like, oh shit, why must my Vipassana end on this day when I finally tried to get the hang of something. So that's why I was like, crap. But anyway.
Usually it's like that. So
Oh, really?
post-retreat, you could meditate on your own. Yeah. It's designed for 10 days for you to get into something. Because at most you can extend maybe let's say you extend for 1 or 2 more days, and that's it, right? Then it stops. So it's okay. It's timely anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Am I allowed to like imagine like Kuan Yin, like what you say, like, like, are you allowed to imagine like a light? Does that fall under like a different meditation? Like, what are you allowed to do and not allowed to do in terms of?
So you understood where I talk about shamatha and vipassana.
Yeah.
Shamatha, it's more about tranquility. You focus on a single meditation object. It could be breath, it could be Kuan Yin, it could be anything. Develop tranquility. And then vipassana is to develop your mindfulness and also insight. Vipassana means insight. So you're getting, for you, when you first started in the retreat, you were developing insights into the inner workings of your mind and the different kind of mental states that fluctuates, that comes in and out. So that's the insight that you have, right? And the insight that allows you to know that you could actually let go of any attachments as those states arise. You could disengage. And you also know, of course, you notice they're impermanent. You notice the states are not you. So simply put. So what we do over here at Hermitage, I know that we explore many techniques, but they are still Samatha and Vipassana, because Samatha and Vipassana eventually they come together. Samatha, in another translation, colloquially it means stopping. You focus on something, you stop. And then Vipassana means looking deeply. So you need to stop in order to look deeply, to understand things. Because we live in a very fast-paced world. Our minds are even faster than the world. So we need to slow down. Because our minds can be so fast, sometimes we want things to be fast. We want transformations to happen quickly. We want psychic abilities to come up immediately. Or we want someone who is suffering to stop suffering immediately. And that's because our minds are very fast, creating a fast-paced world. But the natural state of things is it's okay to slow down. We need to stop, look deeply, and then to go beyond being fast or being slow, because it's not about speed. It's about life. Life is not about speed. And when we have attachments, we have desires, when we're not fully in touch or in tune, then we are fabricating our reality based on our own individual concepts of time. And that is why we can suffer or we can get burned out. Okay, I was just answering the sharings that came early on from the check-ins. All right, so Lavita, what we do over here, let's say, for example, we do metta meditation, right? Loving kindness is considered a shamatha practice because it's focusing on one mental state, metta, loving kindness, generating goodwill, using one mental state. So when you focus on the light, or you focus on guaning, for example, initially that is also shamatha, because we want to have develop a single pointedness of mind to dwell in that light, to help us to calm ourselves so we can let go of thoughts. We don't get trapped in different states. But in Tantra, it's very different. Tantra means, for example, you visualize guaning or you do any kind of mantras, mudras, energetic work, for example. Those are actually shamatha and vipassana coming together. So you take guaning, for example, right? If you just focus on guaning, you're also focusing on a compassionate nature. That is shamatha. But then if you start to delve into how guaning approaches things, that is developing insight into how guaning works. And we're developing different kind of mental qualities within us that we can go without judgment. We can approach things with courage. We can generate patience and understanding. We don't need things to be fast, and we can embrace things with equanimity. So that's shamatha and vipassana coming together. And that's what we're doing. So even in the vipassana traditions, it's the same. After months or years of practice, the practitioners will have shamatha, vipassana together. And why we use thinking, we use contemplation over here, because we're leveraging on the thinking mind, because our minds are pretty active. So to want it to stop thinking immediately, it's not that easy. Since it's thinking, we allow it to think, but we direct the flow of thoughts, the train of thoughts. We direct it with perhaps gratitude or loving kindness. So we leverage on it. Because when we start to reject the mind and say, don't think, don't think, don't think, the mind will not be happy at all, because the mind is so used to thinking, it's used to resisting any kind of orders that is being given. And the mind itself has its own ego. It reacts to us. When we try to control it, we try to subdue it. So when we embrace it, okay, the mind, you want to think, let's think along, but think on my terms. We contemplate on things. Then the mind gets to expand its energy that it wants to, because there's so much energy. It's still very active. So after a while, the mind, it's happy, it's satisfied because we acknowledge that it wants to think, and there's the thinking mind, it's one of the mental states, and then it starts to slow down, it starts to calm down. But along that process, we're also developing insights into ourselves, into the world, because that's contemplative meditation. And eventually what happens in our meditations, we start to calm down. We start to go into emptiness or stillness, or just sitting still without any more guidance, right? Silence. And that is shamatha. But if your faculty of wisdom and insight or vipassana is strong enough, you'll be able to also, in a way, we cut through delusions. So you have Manjushri, the flaming sword of wisdom. It cuts through the delusions as wisdom. So take, for example, you observe something You observe different kind of mental states. For example, for Levita, it's a lot of usually anxiety or maybe just being more active. You notice, and then you don't try to do anything. You don't want to contemplate. You just, okay, bare awareness. And after you realize that this anxiety is it's not that significant in your life because you're greater than it. See, that's insight. Just by noting, but it develops a deeper level of insight into it. And from the insight, naturally, you know that, okay, you know what? I want to let go of it because it's not really me. And because you see that it's separate from you, there's no aversion towards it. There's no hating it. There's acceptance. And acceptance is part of good. I'm talking about when you go deeper and deeper into it. And you start to understand how it actually traps you at times, makes you freak out, makes you go to unnecessary thinking, or maybe it makes you tired, for example. So as we go deeper and deeper in our meditations, regardless of what kind of meditations, because we have developed Samatha and Vipassana to stop and to look deeply, we go deeper and deeper. It doesn't matter whether we have thoughts or not. Doesn't matter. We just go deeper and deeper, deeper. And the deeper we go, things start to pop up. Right? Sometimes there's a saying that the thoughts disappear as soon as they pop up. But why is that? It's because we have gone through enough to realize that there's actually no point latching to any kind of thoughts. So there's a wisdom in us that cuts off the thoughts on its own before it can even generate any mental states. Or if mental states want to arise, let's say irritation, frustration, stress, for example, and then the mind the observer notices it coming up from as a mental state, as a mental formation. But deep down, you have gone through enough to know that it's worthless latching onto stress. Then what happens? Poof, it disappears. It cuts off on its own. So there's Samatha Vipassana going together, coming together, and just go. And as you go deeper and deeper, we just sit. Sometimes many things pop up because we're gaining more and more access into our unconscious. Different mental formations pop up, different mental states, mental knots that define our behaviors and our decision making. We start to cut through them without trying to do anything. And why is that possible? It's possible because we visualize enough. We use the bodhisattvas, the different practices. Let me cut this off. Let me shed Namo Sigato to these. And Namo Sigato symbolizes acceptance, loving kindness, goodwill, blah, 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 blah. We're building all these mental qualities within us. Because as you go deeper and deeper, there's ugly things within us, but there's also the beautiful things that we have really cultivated over the months or years. There's all there, and they naturally cut through. So it doesn't matter what technique we use. Eventually, the practice would converge and go into that. Because we're cutting off these things. And we're using our wisdom. And it's very quick. We don't even need to visualize. The moment we see it, the wisdom comes up. Because we've dealt with, maybe not this particular mental state, but we've dealt with how these mental knots trap us, prevents us from being fully peaceful and happy, how they create suffering in our lives, how they make us feel less. And then it will naturally slice off a lot of things on its own. So that is all the different kind of mental faculties that we build. We build through reading, listening to Dhamma talk, daily reflections, our life experiences, different kinds of meditations that we use. But when the mind starts to silence down, quieten down, it drops in very, very deeply. It becomes more and more subtle. And when it sees things, it knows what to do on its own without us telling it what to do. And there is a very spontaneous kind of wisdom that comes up. So that is the spiritual part of meditation or any kind of practice that we do. Even when we practice chanting, doesn't matter from which tradition, it's the same. It's all skillful means that brings us into the deep awareness that we have to develop our wisdom. And our wisdom is what can liberate us from our suffering. And where does our suffering come from? It comes from the mind's tendency to grasp onto ideas, to grasp onto thoughts that leads to different mental states. And when mental states are arising, Sometimes when we are not mindful enough, we don't meditate enough, we can't catch them when they arise where, in our day-to-day activities. Because there's always the arising of something, right? Be it a thought or a mental state, it starts to arise. And then it perseveres for a while. And then it will dissolve. So the key in practice is to catch as they are arising, and that is as they are coming up. And how can we cut them off? Like I said, everything that we develop through listening to Dharma, studying the Dharma, or practicing the Dharma, we sharpen our mindfulness. And our wisdom and mindfulness merge into one to cut them off, to liberate us as they arise. And then we're back to that stillness, that non-thinking, that awareness, that being. And that is to help us to know that there is the thinking mind. And we are not the thinking mind. We're not the moving mind either. So that's how we go. So a lot of temptations can come in our lives when we are unable to separate us from the thinking mind or mental states. They pull us away. And they can lead us to unhealthy habits. They can lead us to suffering. They pull us away from here. So we don't have peace anymore. We're not living outside in the world, but we're living in our minds in different mental states, different mental states. So ultimately, the practice is to liberate us from all these different kind of mental states. You can identify them as heavenly realms, hell realms, asura realms, animal realms, hungry ghost realms, so and so. Right? But there's a realm that doesn't have all this. And there's no name to call that realm. The Buddha said it's called the asankata. Asankata means the unconditioned state or the unconditioned mind. And he said the unconditioned itself is nirvana. Right? When we're dwelling in there, there's no suffering that can arise. But it's not to say that there's no awareness. And the wisdom, everything is there. And we're just staying there, dwelling there. Does that answer your question a bit? You understand now? So whatever that we learn from other, I would say, Buddhist retreats and whatever you learn at the Hermitage, if you remove the form, the essence is the same. What are we doing? Developing our mindfulness, developing our understanding, gaining insights, gaining wisdom, and using our wisdom to liberate us from unnecessary suffering. Using our wisdom to understand how the mind works, how we're not our mental states, and how they are fabricated thoughts. All these are fabricated mental phenomena that we latch onto. So when we can release our grasping onto them, there will be less and less attachment, which means there's more and more clarity. We start to open up, we start to understand. And then when we finally sit down and meditate, whatever form, whatever technique we use, to help us to get into the state of meditation so that we are happy to dwell in here. So the mind is happy to follow us, to follow this body to be still. Right? This is very important. Sometimes when you sit, the mind just doesn't want to sit, even though the body is still. Right? So how we can develop the friendliness, which is also metta, loving kindness to our bodies, to our minds, and let's sit together. And then we drop in. And once you drop in, it's just a very spacious awareness that we can see very, very clearly. So in all Buddhist traditions, we use different kind of forms. Sometimes we use chanting, and you can use different sounds, but it is to bring us there, to develop that wisdom.